Good day, dear audience. Today's UA. Thank you for joining the fascinating world of the international documentary films, and I hope that you will do that if you haven't done it yet after our today's conversation. Just to get us into this conversation as fast as possible, I would just like to remind you that you can join our conversation by asking questions, and I would really appreciate that, because I believe that the topic we're about to discuss today in the framework of the 3 films we have in our program is very important and sometimes maybe not discussed life, and whether death is something that is still under the human will. And we're going to cover those issues today with the 3 of our guests. So please welcome today with us is the director of the Good Death film, Tomáš Krupa. Hi, Tomáš.
Hi, everyone. Hi,
Hi.
everyone.
We also have today with us Pailin Wedel, the director of Hope Frozen.
Hi, Pailin Wedel. Mm-hmm.
Right. And we also have one of the co-directors of the film Black Hole, Emmanuel. Hi. Very bad internet connection, so he delegated all the rights to speak on behalf of the film to you today. So thank you very much, all the 3 of you, for joining today this discussion with all of us, and I do hope that we'll be joined by the audience quite soon. I know that I have already seen in the internet and in our Facebook feeds there has been strong discussions on those films, and I believe that those films that are something that everyone can relate to, the experiences that are. We now have the general overall pandemic, so basically the news about the death and all different things happening around us, something that we can hear every day on a daily basis in our news. But if we speak about filmmaking and if we speak about documentary filmmaking, that death is not the kind of a super popular topic to be covering in films. And even sometimes that is a topic that is a little bit of taboo for the filmmakers. And I would like to ask you whether you haven't been afraid of taking up this kind of risky topics, because when you're discussing death, there's definitely going to be challenges, there's definitely going to be big discussions afterwards with the audience, with the protagonists, with all of the people involved, because, you know, that is not the topic that people would like to think about. So how did you come up with this? How did you decide to take up on the topic that directly and indirectly speak about death? And weren't you afraid of the risks that it will cover for you in the further on discussion?
I think before we move on, actually, I think you've pinned my screen to be the screen that everyone sees. So they're not seeing who's talking, they're only seeing me, which is great. I like that everyone's seeing me, but I think everyone should also have a chance to see everyone else.
I know from my side, like, I don't know, but I do trust our technical team will do something about that. Because, you know, from where I'm sitting,
Okay.
I can see the big TV and it's hard for me to say what everybody else has seen. But I do believe that our technical team will take care of that. But anyway, Pailin, if you have already started,
Okay.
maybe you would like to start with covering this question.
Sure. I think, you know, in Thailand, death is discussed a lot more freely because in Buddhism, one of the main beliefs is that life consists of birth, sickness, and death, and suffering. And so death is very much part of something that everyone is, I think, more comfortable talking about here. Even at funerals, one of the things we say to each other is, life is not permanent, death is normal, which is, of course, something that could be very shocking if you were to go around a funeral in a more Christian country or a country that's not Buddhist to say to the family members, don't worry, death is normal. Don't grieve too much. It's all normal. Everybody dies. But that's certainly, part of the attitude here in a more Buddhist country. So, because of that, I think, talking about death is not as difficult. And I didn't really choose this topic. I think the story kind of chose me. I stumbled upon it accidentally. So it wasn't a topic that I intentionally sought after. I happened to learned about the family story while doing my other journalism work, and their story just I became very interested in this family's perspective, why they decided to cryopreserve their 2-year-old daughter after she died, and after talking to them for a little bit through my news coverage, there was a lot of depth in the way they thought about what is life, what is death, what makes us human, and a lot of emotion when they talk about it. So I thought there's definitely something I wanted to learn more about in this family. I just kept coming back and filming with them, and here we are 5 years later, and it's a feature documentary. So I would say it just happened naturally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So basically, as it usually happens in documentary filmmaking, you started making a film about slightly different topic, but death only being one of the facts that happening on the background. Because in your case, it's much more a story of love and remembrance, and overall, reliving this human experience and feeling again. For me, it felt like more of a love story, but still having this death at the starting point in this case. Okay, Tomáš, would you like to tell us what was your choice behind going into making your film?
Yeah, first I like what Pailin said, and probably I will consider to move to Thailand, because here in Slovakia, as a part of Western world, we are not capable to talk about the death, actually. And I think we pretend it's not existing, or it's not a natural thing in a part of the life. So that's strange and very opposite than in Thailand. And when I started with this project, it was not personal thing, but maybe it started in a moment when my grandmother passed away, and at the funeral I just realized that my mother, who was crying, was not letting to express her emotions by her husband, my father, because he suddenly said that just watch out, don't cry here. And it was a funeral where I think it's a natural occasion to express our sorrow. So maybe this was the crucial moment when I realized that I would like to maybe talk about the death in my next film. And the good that it's my second feature documentary. And in my previous film with the title Graduates, I was following the topic of freedom. And it might seem that these films are not connected, because euthanasia is mostly talking about the end of the life, and maybe graduation of young people, it's kind of a start or beginning of a real life. But to me, they are both connected with the topic of freedom. And euthanasia also was not something I wanted to make a film about. It also came to me suddenly and not expected way. And the first concept of the film was a different concept with the different people. But I found some article in the newspaper, in Slovakian newspaper, and it was actually an interview with Slovakian young manager in a non-profit organization in Germany, who have been helping to incurable ill people in Germany with voluntary assisted dying. And it was like interesting to me because he was young, he was from Slovakia, and somehow he was good for the original concept I had on my mind, to make a collection of people who are working in some companies or organization dealing with death on a daily basis. But I realized also at one moment that euthanasia is such a complex topic and a controversial topic. It just needs its own space. So I decided at one point that I'm following this story of this Slovakian young manager in this German company, and it all changes completely. And the story continues, but I can explain it later.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. But Emmanuel, I would like to turn back the same question to you. How did you come up making film about death? Because, you know, we've talked before that you were also interested originally in quite a different angle to this topic, but in the end, death also found you, to say it like that.
Yeah, actually, in fact, I didn't know I would be making a film on death, and I was not aware until the end of the editing that the film was about death. It's people who told me that the film was about death. I was like really thinking I was making a film about something else, and I mean about the invisible or about ghosts. And there are a lot of common points between Thailand and India, because it's like, I mean, in terms of attitude or relationship to death, if you consider what Pailin said before. What I realized is I'm an anthropologist, so I've been working in India for a long time, and my mother also has Indian origins, and I've always seen people having a very different relationship to death in India, much more peaceful and playful. And I liked the idea of doing something on with an hypnotherapist, because this past life regression thing was becoming very popular. Like it started really in the 90s in India, and not before. But it became such a craze that it was interesting to use it as a kind of experimental way to make a film. So I wanted to work with an hypnotherapist and with ghost hunters, because there are many ghost hunters in India, like in Thailand, and they invent a lot of device and technologies to try to communicate with entities and spirits. And it's really a kind of creative booster, like when you face the invisible, or like when something is not there, and it's really a booster in terms of creativity. So they've been inventing a lot of technologies dealing with ghosts and the invisible. And I was interested in like crossing these two things, because it's true that death is the common point. In fact, the meeting point of these two worlds. I mean, the world of hypnotherapists doing past life regression and ghost hunters. But I was not aware it was about death at the beginning. I realized much later that under hypnosis, what you do is, when you do past life regression, is that you die many times. And actually you die so many times that it becomes, it gets to another level of experience. You cannot experiment with death most of the time. I mean, like, and in Tomáš film, it's very visible. I mean, death comes as kind of like event, and you have to deal with it. But or I mean, you can choose in his film to do it or not. But it's like really something where your capacity of experimenting are reduced to zero most of the time. But under hypnosis, you get another body, you adopt another body, you live a body, etc. And it's like it becomes something else. And I was interested in making a film about this capacity of human beings to really explore this possibility.
Mm-hmm. And in your film, you're also, like, you know, your main protagonists, both of them, and especially the hypnosis doctor, she's basically dealing with this concept of memory of the past lives, and maybe we can consider also it a little bit like a coping mechanism with death, because according to the Buddhism, there is like this complete cycle of life, and death is just a part of it. You're going to be reincarnated into something else. So do you believe maybe that's also a coping mechanism for overcoming death, mastering your death, understanding your past lives, and getting this belief that, you know, your life in this shape, in the human shape, will not end up in vain, will end up into turning you into some other speech creature or spirit creature or any other life form. So, you know, you'll still be in this cycle of the more generalized existence. Isn't that like a bit of a coping mechanism with that? You're exploring your past life, you're exploring the memories that are not that easily provided to you through the hypnosis, and you're once again, let us say, fighting your mortality with that.
Yeah, certainly it's a coping mechanism, because if you want to have a past life, you need to die to re-experience this past life, in a way, because there is no past life without dying to your present, in a way. So that's what happened under hypnosis. But there is also, I mean, what I like in these hypnotic sessions is that you never know, I mean, what forms you will take, or what were your past lives. And even for the hypnotherapist, it's something which is very enigmatic, and very accidental, and very chaotic. So there have been a lot of debate about what is afterlife in Hinduism and Buddhism for many centuries, and the debates are not ending. It's very funny when you look at it historically. It started 6th century before Christ. There were a lot of debates between Brahmins and Buddhists at the beginning of Buddhism, and they didn't agree at all on what were the components of reincarnation, what was happening just after death, if there was a soul, or what components of the body or the soul were actually reincarnating. And it has continued in the medieval period until now. They don't agree, and there are people who are speculating and have very different theories about it, even in India. Mm-hmm. There is a very interesting theory in India that I've never heard anywhere else, and I wanted to share it with you. It's an old treatise that I found in the medieval period, which is about the embryo. And it's the treatise of the embryo. And what they say is that the embryo has a full memory of his past lives, and when he gets out of his mother's womb, he forgets everything. So it's and all the rituals of death in India are actually using this as a kind of principle, which is a very counterintuitive idea for us, because we don't spontaneously, we don't give a memory to an embryo, and we consider that scientifically, we don't know exactly what happens in his memory, but we usually don't consider that that he has a full memory when he's 6 months old in his mother's womb. But in India, you have like this treatise of the embryo that says this, and I think it's a very interesting thing, because then everything changes. Your conception of death, your conception of life. If you just adopt this new way of looking at the embryo, suddenly and his memory, suddenly everything changes. So that's something that I found interesting.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this story. And like, having said that, I would like to now turn to Pailin, because in your film, in the Hope Frozen, you're also speaking about this concept of memory, and there's also this idea of what makes us human. At some point of the film and at some point of the story, your protagonist, the family, they're coming up with a challenge and with the understanding that there is the big probability that the memory of their child, the memory of their daughter that has been cryonized, is not going to be preserved. And this is a big challenge for all of them, and especially for her older brother, who had all of their hopes inclined on that, because there is a question of, being human, the ability to remember. We all have this memory of the people who we treasure, and that is basically something that is inclined in human nature by default from our point of view, because there's not many other things and not many other realities that we can consider. But there's also this big question of whether, what makes us human, whether it is the memories that we have and the things that we lived through makes us human or not. What do you think about that, and what was your point of view to this very moment on, still remaining the human even if we're trying to master the death?
Sure. I think, my film is about a family who decided to cryopreserve their 2-year-old daughter's brain after she died. And I think, part of why they want to do that is, one, to give her an opportunity at life. They see life as an opportunity, and they're PhD scientists, so they're well aware of what the probabilities are that it will ever happen. But I think they felt like it was their duty as parents to give her that opportunity. But there is this question of, so if she does come back, will her memories all be intact? And what is it that we want? What is it that the family wants? In what shape or form do they want her to come back? And when I ask the family that, they really obviously prefer a biological form, but that opportunity at life could come, in the form of, if we're at a point where all our memories are uploaded to a cloud, and we all exist in a cloud, that's good enough for them. And so this idea of, what makes us human, and what is it they're preserving, and what is it, or what shape or form would she come back? I mean, that's all things that I hope everyone will think about when they watch the film.
Mm-hmm. But what was your personal opinion about that? And I do believe that you've become quite close with the family, and we see a lot of their homemade footage to that, and you're also creating this kind of bond and creating this emotional feelings toward their story also. Did you have this kind of moment, and what was your opinion about all of that in the end, or you decided that you would like to just stay slightly opposed to that to keep your objectivism?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the film is not necessarily about me expressing my opinion. A lot of it is raising a lot of questions. questions that I don't have answers to. You know, what I think makes us human and what you think makes us human might be the same and might be different, and it all depends on, you know, how we were raised, our cultural background, our religion, what our parents told us as children, how we've seen death through our own lives. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think what the film offers is a glimpse into one particular family that believes in the future. And this is what this is how they've expressed the way that they believe. This is how they express their faith, both in Buddhism and in science.
Mm-hmm. And I know that has been a very, there has been a lot of strong discussions about this case in the Thai press, because we also have seen those fragments in your film that the family has been making a lot of appearances on the local television. So has there been a discussion in Thailand, or you haven't yet screened your film there?
I've screened my film here several times. And yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. This case went viral here. They were on almost every morning talk show. And what happened was, you know, their story was told through an internal newsletter at the company they used to cryopreserve her. And somehow that was discovered by Vice, a section called In Vice TV. I don't know if you guys have it there, but called Motherboard. And so when it went on Vice, it became viral all over the world, actually. The BBC did stories on them, and other international outlets did stories on them. So there has been a great discussion. And I think some people think that they are trapping her soul by cryopreserving her. Some people question their use of their wealth for the purpose of cryopreserving her. There was a lot of criticism, but there's also, I think, you know, those are the minority voices. They're very loud voices, as with a lot of people who are very loud about their opinions. And there's also people who just see a family who's struggling with, you know, the death of their child. So there were a lot of opinions, and it was very, very publicly discussed, which, as you saw in the film, was traumatic for the family.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. You know, we have these two cases of the films where basically we're having a different ways of also coping with the death of the closed ones. So we have this discussion on reincarnation and how the past memories are transformed into those coping mechanisms. We see the grief and the love of the family of the lost one and their last chance to give the loved one the opportunity for further life. But we also have the good death film, and we see the protagonist who's not only mastering the death but accepting the death and meeting death as equal. And so Tomáš, my question is to you, because in your film you have a very strong protagonist. So how did you come up to find the beautiful lady that we have seen in your film, and how was it working with her? Because she's definitely providing all of this, you know, strong commitment and the power of will from the screen, and it's something that can easily, you know, be fascinated for the audience.
Yes, thank you for the question. It all started in 2016 when me and my cinematographer traveled to Amsterdam because there was happening international conference about euthanasia. It always happens twice a year, sometimes on the American territory, on the European territory. And we went there because, as I said at the beginning, we decided to follow a Slovakian young manager from the German company. And he went there with colleagues to find a help, because after 2 years of providing help to the German patients, they were suddenly stopped by the government because of the new law. And he introduced us a Swiss doctor, Erika Preissig there, and we briefly talked about the concept of the film, and that we would like to follow the fight of the German company for these rights to be again available in Germany. And I asked her for a collaboration because the German company, they wanted to ask her for a help, also as a well-known fighter for these human rights in the world, and also to use her clinic in Switzerland for patients in Germany who couldn't wait till this issue would be sorted out in Germany. So I asked her for a collaboration in the film, but she was like hesitating about it because she was lacking of the time, and she realized that filming needs a time and also some personal, efforts. But she offered me the option if we would be interesting to follow some of her patients. We could collaborate, and that's also could provide a different direction of the project. So I was not really into it at the beginning, and for the reason because I couldn't imagine that some person and the family would let us go in with the camera so deeply and in their privacy. But the doctors, the Swiss doctor, told me that it's let the decision make on the people, and maybe somebody would have their own but maybe somebody would be willing to work on the film because of his or her reasons. So we split in the Amsterdam with the agreement that the Swiss doctor will send emails to her patients, and we will see if anybody would respond. And after 2 months, we received the only message, and it was from 72-year-old lady Janet Butlin, who was suffering from terminal muscular dystrophy. And the healthcare system in the country in the UK did not allow active or passive euthanasia. And she was a perfect narrator with a charismatic and strong personality, which is important for a film, I think. And we set out an approach with no boundaries from the very beginning, from the first emailing and first Skype calling, and with her utter freedom at the beginning of our relationship. Which did not bother her because her personality was exactly that. She was free, open, direct, and truthful. And I realized from the very beginning she is the one. And this is I would like to do in my new film, because it was about freedom, about the free choice, what we can do, not only with our lives, but also about the ending of a life. Mm-hmm. So
she's
it was
definitely
kind of
very strong character. She's definitely very strong protagonist, because she's not only driving the film, but with this her strong commitment to make the final choice, to make the final stance on her life, it like she makes it very, not to say easy to accept, because it's not always, it's never easy to accept the death, but she makes it quite clear and quite logic why she would like to take this step. And having said that, I would like to turn to our audience, because we have a question from people, and there's the question to all three of you. What was the biggest revelation for you during the filming? What was the biggest revelation for you in communicating with your protagonists? What new have, maybe what have you learned from them?
You know, it was kind of a easy filmmaking, I can say, and I can realize that it's not easy to imagine that we could have a lot of fun during the filming, because she was that kind of a person, and the English lady with a sense of black humor. We know that's kind of an common for English, but what was not expected and very hard for me and also for the film crew was to let her go at the end, because we started to be good friends during the filming, and from the very first day she was collaborating, and also her approach towards us and towards the filming was very open and very friendly. From the first day she started to have an interest about us, about our lives, about our girlfriends, wives, children, and we have a lot of good talks about personal things. So the friendship started to be very natural and very deep and strong. And I realized maybe 2 or 3 days before her date in Switzerland that we have to let her go. And it's kind of you just found out, you found a new friend, and suddenly in several months you have to let him go, or let her go. So that was very hard for me, and also for the crew. And I realized during the filming that what she was really appreciating was to find acceptance and understanding for her decisions. And if anybody from her surroundings, friends or family, was trying to convince her to postpone her decision or to cancel it, she was not feeling very comfortable with it, and she was exhausted by it. And she felt very well with us, with the film crew, because we were not doing this. We were not hesitating about her decisions, and trying to
support her, basically.
We're trying to support her. So thank you. And at the end, it was also complicated for us, and I found myself in this position, trying to to ask her if she really wants it, and maybe it would be good if she would postpone it. So yeah, it was hard times to accept it also.
Mm-hmm. So that's always this moment of letting go, both the person you love and maybe sometimes even the film. But okay, Emmanuel and Pailin, what was the what was the revelations for you during working with your film? What was the revelations about the people you have been working with? What was something new that has brought to you by this film and by these stories?
I'll let you go first, Emmanuel.
Well, it's very difficult to answer this question, because there are many things actually happened, and maybe the biggest revelation was to realize that it was possible to play with death with such with like many means or tools, and the worst thing is probably to, as Tomáš said, to just ignore it and do as if it was not possible to cope with it. But once you accept it, it's like you can invent or design a lot of ways to cope with it, and there have been many theories and many religious systems of belief, etc. And this creativity at this last frontier, I would say, is very remarkable. So whoever we met during the film was having his own theories about what was happening after death, or like, and it was a constant debate, and we were in a state of constant speculation about what could happen, etc. And many people had theories, but with a lot of humor also. So especially, I mean, the ghost hunters, if you remember in the films, they're really into quantum physics, and they think that what happens is that we become some kind of particles, and that particles get reassembled in somewhere in the cosmos or in the invisible, and that it's very chaotic, and it's probably what was the common point between what we could investigate through hypnosis and through the ghost hunting inquiry, is that like this world of reincarnation or what was happening after death was actually completely chaotic. And so there's been theories, especially in the West, that consider reincarnation since the end of the 19th century as something very organized and very coherent, as like you usually you adopt a body, and I mean, if you do things so you reincarnate into something which is better, etc., etc., and there is this process. And but what we've seen during the film is that it's one theory among others, and that it's more common to consider that you enter into a kind of very chaotic chaotic space of reassembling and redistributing features. So and suddenly you become something else that you would not expect. So so it's really a frontier where actually many things are possible, and it's really interesting to cope with it with speculative means, you know, to like because we have our imagination, and it's nice to have our imagination, and it's a zone where you can imagine like many things, and humans have been imagining like a lot of things for many centuries.
Well, like this is the territory of unknown, and you know, like things that you do not know, they always cause a lot of myths, and they always cause a lot of different conceptions, because if you don't know something for certain, then you're definitely going to try to explain it to yourself. And I believe that you have a very nice closing frame in your film that slightly resembles to this idea, because you have this final frame at the river that is done in like blue and white colors, which actually gives us a little bit of shaken feeling whether what we see is reality or what we see is, you know, the other side of the spiritual life. So whether what we see are those, you know, reassembled particles of people and ghosts, or whether what we see are the real people living right now. I'm sure we're slightly losing Emmanuel, but before we're getting him back, so Pailin, the question back to you, that was from the audience. What was the biggest revelation for you while working with your characters and while working with your protagonist, while working with his family?
Sure. I think the biggest revelation probably actually came the very first day that I met them. I actually was, so my husband's a journalist, and I usually work as a journalist as well. And My husband is American, and he invited me to go meet this family, and their story had already gone viral on Thai television because the little girl was the youngest person in the world to be cryopreserved. And so we went, and I was a little resistant at first, and I was thinking, oh, you know, I don't know if this is a story, like, who is this family? They don't know what they're getting into. I had all these judgments about what the family is going to be like. Who would cryopreserve their 2-year-old child, right? I think when you mention cryopreservation, you think of somebody who's maybe, you know, kind of like a mad scientist, or you know, you think of Frankenstein, you think of all this imagery, and then you meet the family, and then you realize, you know, that both parents hold PhDs in science, and they know exactly what they're doing, and that grief is a very personal thing, and everybody grieves in different ways. And through going through that process of deciding to cryopreserve her, they really put the whole family into a journey of, you know, trying to figure out, you know, what is life, what is death, what is love, and how can they love their child even after she dies. And so I think it's that journey that is the most interesting thing. And that's really the revelation, is it's coming into a subject having these very crude preconceived notions about who people might be, and then having your mind changed. We were supposed to only be there and interview this family for 15 minutes, and we ended up staying for 2 hours talking about different types of philosophies. And so I think that's the biggest revelation for the film. And as the film went on, I think, you know, different things drove me to go on and on for so many years. I think one of the things I recognize is that so many films from Southeast Asia really focus on I don't know, poverty, human trafficking, dictatorships. And when's the last time you saw a Southeast Asian scientist? When's the last time you saw people talking about science and futurism and technology that's from Southeast Asia? So I felt like it was a really different kind of story, and that a lot of people haven't seen. And that's another revelation that kind of drove me to keep working on this film for such a long time. But I wanted to also talk about how my character also, you know, really kind of makes sense of this meld between Buddhism or reincarnation and science through kind of believing the particle theory that you were talking about. So it's interesting how that thinking, how, you know, scientists make sense of religion and vice versa, how that seems to be the crux of how people make sense of reincarnation in a more scientific way.
Mm-hmm. We have another question from the audience. Like our spectators would like to know if you have used any references for your film, because you were telling very sensitive stories, so maybe there you're using some references for inspiration. That's again a question to all of you. Or there was nothing that really inspired you to tell the story in the way that you did in the end?
I'm a first-time feature filmmaker. I've made a lot of half-hour TV documentaries, but this is my first feature-length film that I really had to force myself to think about what is my style of filmmaking that is not married to a TV format. And so what I did was I actually set up a documentary film night at the Foreign Correspondents Club here and forced myself to watch a documentary every week for a year.
That sounds really nice.
To understand the filmmaking process. So I think that process definitely became influential in the way I made this film. I recognized very quickly, you know, this is what I want my film to look like. This is not what I want my film to look like. And through watching, you know, a lot of films, developed hopefully a style that that is my own, and shared that style with the editor and the videographer so that we're all on the same page. But yeah, I think the films that really that I'm always attracted to, no matter what, is films with a lot of empathy, especially for controversial characters. And I think it forces people to look at people who are very different from you or think very different from you and recognize the commonality. And I think through empathy, that can happen. And so I think those kinds of films are really influential to me.
Thank you. Tomáš, Pailin, what was the references for you, if there were any references? And there is like an addition to this very same questions, have you considered of actually selling your films to any kind of online platforms to raise a broader discussion and to reach more audience? So it's like a second part of the question. References, and have you considered working with the bigger internet platforms for that?
So I must admit that I'm not watching documentaries almost at all. So I have no references from documentary filmmakers. But what was important for me and the cinematographer was to make a film which could be received very in a calm and beautiful atmosphere, to make it in a cinematic way, because we were talking about something very disturbing, as is euthanasia. So it was important to make the film, beautiful for the recipients, and also the surrounding of the Janet's house and the place where she was living was a small old house in the middle of a beautiful garden, so surrounded by the nature. So that was the most inspiration for us, that place, and at the place we realized how to make this film. It all happened so quickly, as I try to explain how we found the character and what was the initial idea, that there was no time to get prepared for something like that. We just packed all the film equipment and traveled to England, because Janet just sent an email, one of the emails, that she had only 3 months of her life till the traveling to Switzerland. So this was the main references for us: the limitless of the time, the beauty of the place, and the cinematic way of storytelling, which is mostly favorite for fiction films. And I think aesthetically way of the filmmaking is also important for me, and to make euthanasia topic for the recipient more easily to accept and to watch. And the online platforms, yes, we already distributed the film in the online platforms. You can find the film on the Films platform, which is the originally Czech online website, but it's a collection of films from very well-known film festivals, from Dog Leipzig, Visions Duril, Filmmersale, and so on. So the film starts its online distribution there, and it's also on a Vimeo VOD platform. And now I am very happy to share the film via online distribution ways. So for me, very important is not to to reach many film festivals and theatrical audiences, but it's important that this film could see so many people as it gets. And I think the online platforms, it's very suitable way how to reach the audience now, especially in these times. And
Well,
I think one of the most important messages of Janet's story is that actually the way we refuse to talk and to accept the voluntary assisted dying as an option actually could make lives of incurable ill people shortened, because they have to escape somehow from their countries and to find places in the world where they accept it, and to travel. And many times they are just afraid that they will miss the time till they could manage it by themselves. So if, for example, in England, the society would be willing to talk about it and to accept this as an option, still as an option, probably Janet would stay with her family a little bit longer. But she was really afraid that she wouldn't manage it by herself physically. And so.
Okay, thank you for that also, but that will actually bring us to the final question. But before that, back to Emmanuel, still asking you about the references, because I do believe that the person who have asked it would like to hear that. So do you have any references for your film? Because your film is made in a completely different way. You're actually using this, building the story on, let us say, the testimonies of the protagonist itself. So whether you're inspired by something else when you were choosing this shape of storytelling?
We didn't have references, really more counter references, because we didn't want to make the film as like most of the films which are dealing with ghost or reincarnation are most of the time very sensationalist, and we wanted to avoid that. So we had many examples that we didn't want to follow. It was very difficult during the editing, because it's very easy, in fact, to be tempted to illustrate, or when you deal with ghosts, you want to make them appear in a way or the other. And when you deal with people who have mental images, so what you see is people under hypnosis in real time, it's a temptation to illustrate what they see in their brain, to simulate these mental images. And we finally decided not to do that, except at one moment in the film, which is very short at the end. But during most of the film, we let the spectator imagining what the people are imagining, and the film is actually happening in the head of the audience, and this kind of relationship to the audience, I think. I don't know if it has been tested, but it's really something that you can experiment when you deal with invisible things, and how to make them alive when it's not there, but how to make them alive. It was our problem, and it's so our references became the patients who went under hypnosis, and many of them had a very lively inner world, I would say, and especially one of them, which is whose name is Joy in the film, and who see himself as the assistant of the Buddha in the 6th century BC under hypnosis, and it's really like for us it was very important, this hypnosis, where it goes into a totally crazy curve of reincarnations and is into a kind of trance, because it's a cinema in itself. And what I realized is that, in fact, hypnosis is a kind of cinema, a mental cinema that you play with yourself or with your unconscious. And so it cannot be illustrated. I mean, it's something which has which cannot have references except maybe if you. I mean, in kind of. We didn't want to use neural imagery or things like that to illustrate what was happening. We wanted to let the spectator imagine what was happening in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. And as far as we almost have to close, I would like to sum up our discussion with actually asking you about the other issue that is also connected to the human rights issue. Because, this discussion that has been founded somewhere in the early 20th century with this big splash of modernism was actually the right to death. And right now we have this idea in the fundamental human rights, which is the right to life. And there's always the discussion of whether a human being should also be entitled to have this right to dignified death. So having been working on this topic already, having this ability to take a different look for the different people's mechanisms of accepting the death and working with the death, what position would you now take if you have been asked about this question of providing this right to death as a fundamental human right? And that's not only that much of euthanasia, but it's a part of it, but it's like a broader issue overall. Like, for example, the right not to be resuscitated, for example, if they're speaking about the very specific medical conditions, or the right to have a good life in the latest times of your life. So, like, for example, to provide a specific medical care or palliative care to the elderly people or to the people with disabilities. So having all of this complexity of death now, being slightly more informed than most of the people are, experiencing it while making your films, what position would you take on that? Should we have the right to death as one of the fundamental human rights? That's a hard one and a serious one, I understand, but where would you get to closer now? Yes or no?
I think Tomáš would be
probably
better to
Yes,
answer.
I think he's the most expert out of all of us.
I think it wouldn't be a surprise that my personal approach towards these questions, towards if we would have a right for choosing voluntary assisted dying or not, I think we should have this right available for all people in the world, and it's still an option. And I don't think if we would accept it in the society, it would mean that all people would die this way. It would be just an option. And for me personally, I would live a little bit more comfortable if I would have this impression that maybe in the future, if something went wrong, I would have this option available, and hopefully I wouldn't need it, but I would feel more comfortable if I would. And I think it would be always a hard question for the society, because it completely changes fundamentally the concept of life, the way we accept it in the Western culture, because accepting it legitimizes that the thesis that we own our lives, not an entity that transcends us and that would give me life, and therefore it belongs to it. That's very common for the Christian philosophy, and that's why we have a problem with accepting for a voluntary assisted dying as an option, because it completely changes the way how we accept the life, and that somehow it doesn't belong to us. And I really would like to have an impression that life belongs to me, then I can create my own destiny. But sometimes I have an impression that it's not possible, right? That something which is over us. But yeah, so
Yeah, in our case, there is definitely something over us which is called timing. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but unfortunately, we just have to wrap up. But I would like to thank you for this conversation, and I would like to say that at least as an online entities, we're definitely going to be here as long as internet exists. And I would like to once again remind our audience that you can later rewatch or like join us in this conversation also on YouTube or in Facebook, because all of the recordings will be provided there. So once again, thank you very much, dear guests. Thank you, Tomáš. Thank you, Pailin. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you very much for joining us at our festival. And I would like to really recommend our audiences to check out all of the 3 films that have been in our dialogue today. So please do check out The Good Death, The Hope Frozen, and The Black Hole. They're available at our platform docuspace.org. You can watch those films, and please make sure you do. And even more so, there is an option to ask the question to our directors or to record your emotions or your feelings about the film via dialogue. It's just below the film, and you can actually record a message in 60 seconds asking the best questions that you have, or just letting us know how you felt about the film. That's very important for all of us. And even more, 2 of those films are a part of the DocuWorld competition, so please do vote. There are those 5 stars below the film, then you can use that. That's very important for us. You still have the time. Our award ceremony is about 5 hours till now, so basically you still have the time to change all of the results, so please do vote for that. Thank you very much again for joining us today in this conversation, and please stay with us. In about 20 minutes we're going to have another event in the DocuRights program. Thank you very much for joining DocuDays UA. I hope we'll be able to see you in person next year. And now, thank you very much. Stay with us, and let's do filming together online.
Thank you, Kateryna.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.